This is Ashley Newby, and you're listening to the Black Studies Podcast, a Mellon Grant-sponsored series of conversations examining the history of the field. Our conversations engage with a wide range of activists and scholars, senior figures in the field, late doctoral students, cultural workers, political organizers, and everyone in between in order to explore the cultural and political meaning of Black studies as an area of inquiry and its critical methods. On today's episode of the Black Studies Podcast, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Valerie Grim, Professor of African American and African Diaspora Studies at Indiana University Bloomington. Dr. Grim holds an MA and PhD in history from Iowa State University and received her undergraduate degree from Tougaloo College, a historically Black college located in Tougaloo, Mississippi. She currently holds the position of Director of Undergraduate Studies, and her previous administrative work includes being chair for 12 years of the Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies, as well as Director of Graduate Studies and Director of the Thomas I. Atkins Living Learning Community. She has engaged in diverse committee work in and outside of the academy. These efforts have spanned more than 30 years and 60 different committees, many of which involved engagement with students and collaboration with academic and living communities throughout the United States and Africa. Dr. Grim is also the current president of the National Council for Black Studies. As a scholar, Dr. Grim researches and publishes in the area of 20th and 21st centuries African American rural history. She has conducted research and provided lectures in North America, Europe, South America, Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. Currently, she has completed Between Paternalism and Self-Determination, Rural African American Life in a Yazoo-Mississippi Delta Community, 1910 to 1970. She has completed a book on the Brooks Farm Community, formerly known as the Brooks Farm Plantation, located in Sunflower and Leflore Counties in the Yazoo-Mississippi Delta. Her current book projects, Between 40 Acres and a Class Action, Black Farmers Protest Against United States Government, 1995 to the 2010s, and Black Land-Grant Universities and African American Rural Development, 1990 to the present, focus on the needs of African Americans in rural America and efforts to help them achieve full democratic participation and engagement with federal farm and rural development policies and programs. She also is co-authoring a volume on the rural students in higher education. Grim has edited several journal special issues volumes, including Agency Reduction in the Experiences and Realities of Africana People, Spirit, Mind, and Body, Research and Engagement in an African American and African Diaspora Studies graduate course, The Experiences of Rural Women, Children, and Families of Color in the U.S. and Global Communities, and American Rural and Farm Women. Dr. Grim has published widely in leading journals, anthologies, and edited volumes. Articles have appeared in journals such as Agricultural History, Frontier, Journal of Women's History, Black Women, Gender, and Families, Oral History, Journal of Rural Development and Perspectives, Great Plains Quarterly, Locus, an Historical Journal of Regional Perspectives on National Topics, and Living History Farms and Agricultural Museums. Book chapters have appeared in edited books such as Services Mandate, How American Land-Grant Universities Shaped the Modern World, Beyond 40 Acres and a Mule, African American Land-Owning Families Since Reconstruction, Women Writing Women, Rural African Americans in the 20th Century, Oral History, The Frontiers Reader, Outside In, African American History in Iowa, the International Library of Critical Writings and Business History series, Women in Business, Unrelated Kin, Race and Gender and Women's Personal Narratives, and Eli's Whitney Cotton Gin, 1793 to 1993, and American Farm Women in Historical Perspectives. During her 30-year career as a scholar and academic leader, public intellectual, and social activist, Dr. Grim has worked as a consultant, researcher, and field producer on numerous museum and creative projects, as well as rural history and development workshops. She was a consultant for the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History in Detroit, Michigan, the Conner Prairie Museum, Fishers, Indiana, Living History Farm in Urbandale, Iowa, African American Museum in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, the Woodville Public Museum in Woodville, Mississippi, and Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. Her documentary work includes films such as Black Is, Black Ain't, and a radio documentary, America in the 20th Century, Claiming a Piece of the Peace. She conducts workshops about rural Black experiences in the United States, Africa, South America, and Europe. Relevant content concerned such issues as landed ownership, air property rights, history of various landed peoples, race, politics, gender, culture, and community identities. As a professor, she teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in the areas of African American and African diaspora culture, history, politics, identity, literature, with intersections related to popular culture, sexuality, economics, and others. She has directed numerous theses and dissertations. Dr. Grim is a recipient of numerous grants and awards for scholarship, teaching, and engagement. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Black Studies Podcast. Today, we are speaking with Dr. Valerie Grim, Professor of African American and African Diaspora Studies at Indiana University, Bloomington. Hello, Dr. Grim. How are you doing today?
Hello, Dr. Newby. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for being here. It's going to be
I'm glad to be here. Yes.
So we have several different things that we could talk about today. So we'll get started with what drew you into Black Studies as a field and what keeps you committed to the field.
Okay. So I probably can answer this question best by just thinking about my training as a graduate student. Got a PhD in the traditional field in 1990s. In 1990, and so what that meant was I studied history, but within history I had a specialization in African American history. This dissertation work and studies involved rural African Americans, and so when I finished that degree, I wanted to work at a HBCU. But that year, there weren't many jobs, at least at the time when I was applying. And so my next step was to look around the PWIs and see if there were any Afro-American study or African-American studies or Black studies programs, any nomenclatures that I feel comfortable with where I thought I could kind of have a Black studies kind of experience within a PWI. So I ended up in Indiana. That's how I got to the department of what was then the Afro-American Studies Department. And that department started in 1970. It started as a department, and so it had a great history, had great interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary faculty. And so I joined that faculty and just readily was drawn to the various ways in which we were having conversation in an connected way about Black life. And then I learned that there were Black organizations that focused specifically on the experiences of African Americans. I hadn't known much about that while I was in graduate school, so I started to pursue those because I was in a Black studies type department. And that's what drew me. Now, what has kept me there has been the mission of Black Studies, which is to be academically excellent, culturally grounded, and also to understand the importance of maintaining social responsibility. So I like that connection and intersection between research, theory, and practice. And that is where I like to be because I believe knowledge is for the sake of trying to make life different for humanity and not knowledge for the sake of knowledge. And that is why I really appreciate Black study. It's the academic excellent research, social scientific part of it. But I also like how the discipline itself emphasizes community engagement. That's what keeps me in it.
Thank you. So you mentioned the organizations that you learned about that focused on Black life and Black study. And I know that you are very much involved in the National Council for Black Studies, or NCBS. So do you want to speak a little bit about your work with that organization?
Sure. So currently I'm the president of NCBS, the National Council for Black Studies. And we have, of course, the mission of doing the work of being socially responsible, academically excellent, and culturally grounded in what we attempt to do. We host a national conference every year, and within our organization, we have a tremendous, I think, mentoring program that allows us to start to look at and observe up and coming scholars. So at our conference, we have space for undergraduates to do and present research, graduate student, of course, faculty members. And I think that is important because what we try to do is to remind ourselves that we are in this work not only to build reputation as professionals and scholars, but that there are communities of African descended people who really want to understand how what we do and how we theorize can be useful to them in the ways that they are trying to address their issues. So in doing so, we have a civic engagement committee, which I think is important because of what I just stated, why I stay in it. In our civic engagement community, apply for grants. We just got a grant from the Tides Foundation, and the focus of that grant is to become involved in what we call the Freedom Project idea. And that is not necessarily putting up brick and mortar kind of buildings, but using that idea to implement programs around the country at this moment where African American youth and young children and teenagers can learn their history. So where history has disappeared in some of these educational spaces, K through 12, we are committed to helping to put that history back into communities. We're not the only ones doing this. There are lots of freedom schools, movements happening around the country. We're just going to employ that idea in a different kind of way through our civic engagement component of the National Council for Black Studies. We also have space for graduate students. We try to mentor graduate students who come to the conference and help them understand what the profession is about. And we want to be available just for community participants. So we have activist supporters. We have people we build relationship with in community, and people in the community come to the conference and they kind of remind us that they need to hear more about how they can use the research of Black scholars. And so that's what we're doing. And in short, that's not all what we're doing.
Yeah, no, NCBS has definitely been integral to having that community component. I think a lot of times, particularly at PWIs, Black studies can feel so isolated and like we're off in our own corners. But NCBS has definitely provided a space to have more interaction and engagement with each other across the country. So that's been super important and impactful for the discipline as a whole.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you, so having a PhD in history, how do you situate yourself in relationship to like history, which can be a more conservative and traditional discipline in terms of its methods and what it considers to be research, and Black studies, which is more interdisciplinary and not necessarily as allows for the exploration beyond the archives, or what's present in the archives.
So being trained as a historian simply provided me with a methodological tool that I could use for doing work. So I know the historical method very well and continue to use it. But it's not the only thing that I use. It's just one method I use for data gathering. But it's not the method I rely totally on to understand phenomena. And so what that means, or cultural ground, and what that means is then I have to look to other places to intersect those kinds of things. Here's a set of data. The data provide this, but what Black study allows for is not to just provide a descriptive analysis of the data. I like Black study because it lends itself to interpretive analysis. And by interpretive analysis, I mean it brings in from the perspective of Black people, their voices and their interpretation of their lives as lived from the inside out, as opposed to as a historian writing about it from the outside in. And what I like about Black studies is that its primary objective is to see Black people first as their subject and not as the object of anybody's imagination, including scholars. I start with Black people as the subject of their experiences, as the owner of their knowledge, and I try to understand how both the experience and the knowledge allows me to interpret the data in such a way that people continue to see black people as the subject of the very data being analyzed and examined.
Thank you. So building on that a little bit, I know that, as you stated, you do research on African American rural history. Um, so two questions. And one, have you seen Sinners, the
Oh,
movie?
no, but I know it just came out,
Mhm.
and I know that it is rich with all kinds of African American traditions and values. So it's on my list because people have been coming up to me. Have you seen Center? Have you seen Center? So I know it's about the land, and I know
Mhm.
it's about Clarksdale, Mississippi. I grew up in the Mississippi Delta, about 30 minutes south of Clarksdale. I know exactly that area. Spent a lot of time in Clarksdale, so I can't wait to see Centers because everybody's coming to me saying that, and that so I know it's rich with stuff that deals with spirituality and
Mhm.
land. And those are the things that are important in the study of rural African Americans, particularly Southern rural African Americans.
So what motivated you? I do think that, so one, I think it's a wonderful movie. And I think that the representation of rural life, rural Black life in a particular time period in the 1930s, I don't know that I've seen another depiction of that in that way. So I will be very curious to know what you think when you see it. But what was your motivation for focusing on Black rural life in your research?
So I went to a historically Black college, Tougaloo College, which is located in Tougaloo, Mississippi, not very far from Jackson State. It's a private school. And I went there to study history with the idea that I would go on to law school once I completed my undergraduate degree. So I think in my second semester there, I took a course in African American history or African American literature. And I really realized that I had lived a kind of life and experience that I didn't see fairly represented in American history textbooks or that weren't even covered, I think, enough in textbooks dealing with African American experiences. And so that issue had to do with Black land ownership. I thought there wasn't enough of that about more contemporary Black rural life rooted in land ownership. As we know, there's significant amounts of information that relates to slavery and Blacks working the fields and sharecropping. But where I grew up with Black folks who owned hundreds of acres of land and who had, families who were doing all kinds of things on the land. Black folks who had built churches and schools and done a lot of different things. And so I felt like here's a story worth telling, even though it's important to know what the labor situation was for an overwhelming majority of Blacks who survived slavery and whose generation after that was still tied to the land, especially in the 1920s and the 1930s or prior to the mechanization of agriculture. And so when I realized how my life had been lived and what I knew of other folks, I thought, I want to study this and I want to understand how people are doing research on Blacks with farms and land and how that land was being used and purchased and lost and those kinds of things. And that is the impetus for it. What I knew from a lived experience, I wanted to study it from an academic research-based experience.
Thank you. I think that that's the starting point being like a lived experience and taking the differences you saw in representation versus lived experience as a motivating factor in providing more representation is so important. Both of my grandparents are from Mississippi, so rural Mississippi. So,
Where?
Pinola and I can't remember where my grandfather is from. But yeah, one of them went to Tougaloo, actually.
Fantastic.
Would have definitely been before you, but one of like my grandfather has sharecropping. That's what his family did, and then my grandmother's family owned their own land, and so they had a farm, but they were working it themselves and had other people working for them. So that juxtaposition is something that I heard a lot about growing up, but I don't think it was as represented in, definitely not like media, but also in research. So super interesting. I want to build on that and ask how you feel that Black Studies influences your administrative roles. You're the director of undergraduate studies and the director of a living learning community. So what is the role that Black Studies plays, or maybe even should play, in how we approach administrative work?
So a couple things. I'm the director of undergraduate studies now. I was the chair of the department for about 12 years. And then prior to being the chair, I was director of graduate studies. I am no longer the director of the Living Learning Center, but I've held these roles because I feel like it's important that, of course, to contribute to your department, but also approaching them through the lens of Black studies, which is to approach them looking at the students and the work that was to be done in the Living Learning Center as engaged work, as work that communities of people could contribute to, with the understanding that the purpose of it is to make the experiences of Black people on the campus as well as in society more visible, and to help people understand the plights and backgrounds even of the very students we were enrolling at Indiana University. And so how Black Studies shaped that was for me to, first of all, be very aware that it deserves to be in the academy, that the history and experiences of African Americans deserve to be studied, deserve to be theorized, deserve to have methodological approaches and frameworks and paradigms that shift the narrative from the Eurocentric perspective to a more corrective and not necessarily proscriptive perspective, but definitely a kind of perspective that help folks see different ways they can think about when and where Black folks have entered life and how Black folks have lived their lives. I also wanted to hold these roles because I'm just a profound advocate of agency. I like agency. I like Black Studies to have its own agency. And by having its own agency, I like for Black Studies to be able to say, yes, we are trained maybe traditionally and in some ways, but we also are aware there are theories and methods in Black Studies that we use now that help us understand agency, that help us understand ways in which Black Study can move the conversation about curriculum to a new level, move it from a multicultural maybe to a interdisciplinary to a transdisciplinary approach, where you see all these different positions intersecting, that to have a more fully understanding, you have to read broadly. And that's the thing I want to emphasize, where people would think that Black Study wasn't rigorous enough. That's BS. To be a good Black Studies scholar, you have to read broadly across so many different fields, because you're trying to connect the different ideas and understand the various conclusions that are being reached in singular fields, in addition to using different methodologies and narratives and literary approaches to further develop the field. And so I wanted to be a part of that, being able to say we have our own voice, we have our own agency. We don't need any overseers. We don't need it. We are not academic sharecroppers, but that we are folks who are able to do our own work, and that needs to be respected.
So I'm very, as a director of undergraduate studies, I'm very interested in the ways in which programs and departments develop Black studies curricula and in the ways in which Black studies plays out in the classroom. So can you speak a little bit about both, so in claiming and working towards that agency, what does that mean for how our programs and departments can be structured? And what does that mean for what our classrooms can do or look like that might be different from a more traditional university classroom, or a university classroom that is firmly situated in history or political science?
So Black studies, at least at IU, when it started in 1970, it started with an interdisciplinary kind of thought process. So the undergraduate degree here has 3 tracks, or 3 concentration, depending on what language are used on different campuses. But the concentrations are designed to help students both get a broad and general understanding, and also some specific knowledge depending on what their interests are. So the concentrations are art. The other concentration is history, culture, and social issue, and the other concentration is literature. So the history, culture, social issue is the area where the social sciences and the contemporary problems of Black life discussed in a major kind of way. Of course, any Black studies program, worth its salt, is going to have an art program, because the Black arts movement was instrumental in helping to usher in how Black people have lived and their thought in some ways in an Afrofuturistic kind of way, but also the literary in any Black study program that sees itself as important and making a contribution have to have a literary wing. And so our curriculum started there, but then as we evolved, and to that we had a performance unit, an African American Arts Institute that performed these things. So we had a choral ensemble, we had a soul band, still have these things, and then of course we have a dance company. So Black bodies were studied, and Black life was put on stage, and these things intersected between the performance and the intellectual, the performance and the academic wing of the department. As we develop and move closer to the 21st century, we started to think about how in those different areas we could integrate things that dealt with sexuality, gender studies, Black women studies in the late 19th century. But also in the 20th century, we moved to diaspora. So you had to bring in the diaspora and start to think about Black people around the world in general, on the continent, around the world as well. So Black studies, the programs, I think have to show some marching in time with the way society is developing, which means that because we are in community, we're constantly thinking about new classes that reflect that community need, while also staying grounded in the history, culture, and social aspect of the major. And so that's kind of like the broad academic way of thinking about it. The degree way of thinking about it is to ultimately have a view toward what institutionalized you the most, which is a graduate program. And so we developed a graduate program in the early 2000s, got to the PhD in 2009, which institutionalized Black study as one of, I think, 17 now PhD granted degrees in in the country at this time. And so I think the key here is to understand how to both maintain the hippocampus, so which is the floor. What is the floor in Black study? So the floor in Black studies is always to have that historical, epistemological framework and knowledge of courses that gives students a foundation. And then from there, you build up and you build out based on how you want to differentiate your degree from what a degree that's offered at any other institution. And that's what we did. In the case of being the director of undergraduate studies, some of that is shaped also by university needs. So the university moved toward gen ed, everybody having to take gen ed. So you had to come up with some gen ed courses that would pop, right? That students would want to enroll in. That's the major part of it. And so we have to follow things within the academic structure of the university in order to deal with credit teaching hours, enrollments, number of majors, and things like that. And so we had to think about courses, what would be new, what would be interesting, and how can we at the same time make sure that student graduating with the degree understand what the field is. So we start doing things in our senior seminar, and we develop an introductory level in the field course where students take that in the sophomore year, and then when they get to the culminating course, which is the senior seminar, it tells us where we need to plug gaps so that when they go, they do have a fuller understanding, of the degree. And so that's how we have done it, trying to pay attention to what students say they like, trying to pay attention to the administration in terms of what they say they need, and trying to pay attention to the job market. What can you do with this degree? That is driven also by students' parents wanting to know, what is my child going to do with this? And we have to be able to provide an answer to that, both by pointing to what certain courses have given them in terms of foundation knowledge, but also how knowledge is optional in terms of how you use it.
Thank you. I think that, as you said, the balancing or the consideration that has to be taken of student needs and wants and university needs and wants, and how it's in responding to the job market and the parents who have questions. I think that it's a lot, but I think it's always important to remember that there are multiple stakeholders that have to be considered in thinking about the direction of a Black Studies department. And I know that, like, just personally, I learned a lot from you when you were here before, and I appreciate having that perspective and thinking about the work that I have to do for however long I'm going to end up doing it. So I want to shift gears a little bit and ask you what interests you most about the past of the field of Black Studies.
Well, I think what interests me most are the discourses around what it should be and what it should do, and how it should be structured. I think that what should it be is both a grounded question and a continuously evolving question. And by that I mean, what should it be? I think Black Studies should be a discipline that provides an understanding of Black people as subjects. And what I mean about that is the focus is centered on who they are and what they have lived. That's what I think should be the foundation. How we do that, for me, can be in multiple ways. As long as when we're doing that, we're not only just talking about the experiences, but we are talking also about what the frameworks are that allows us to better interpret those experiences. That our methods are in line with helping us get to Black people's voices and Black people's understanding of their own lives. And that our theories takes into consideration how Black people have both dealt with the reduction of their agency, but also how they have built agency. And so if at the end of the day, 25 people got different ways they get there, when we all get in the room, we can say we at the same house, right? Mm-hmm. That's important. That's important to me. It's an important conversation to keep having. I think because it is interdisciplinary in nature, very similar to the way in which Du Bois did his social scientific work, which involved fictional writing, non-fictional writing, but it definitely involved sociological work and social science and history. When you put all those things together, I think it's important to recognize that when you engage in the Black Study enterprise, that means you're going to be doing some interdisciplinary work that brings in a lot of different perspectives. So you have to continue to think about what's new, what's happening, what are people talking about. I know in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of emphasis on Afro-pessimism, Afrofuturism, and these kinds of things, and things that are dealing with major gender kind of issue. I think all of that's good, but at the end of the day, I want to understand, how does that bring us back to the subject of Black folks in ways that we see them and not my voice or somebody else's voice. I think what also concerned me today is sustainability. How do we sustain ourselves in a situation where everything negative, everything that breaks down in the country is DEI and falsely claimed to be in a racially literate way? The faults of Black folks, because we all are too incompetent to be anywhere but in the cotton fields. We need to be thinking about how do we use our money, and where do we put that money, and how does the use of our money liberate us, so we can even think about Black study kind of content K through 12. And here I'm not talking about this silly argument about critical race theory to kindergartners, so don't let anybody misinterpret me here. I'm simply saying that as early as kids can learn positive images of themselves, of their peoples, of their community, the better able they will be to have positive attitudes about what they can achieve. If that is being blocked in schools today, we have to take our resources, use our church fellowships hall, use our lodges, use our sorority and fraternity building, whatever we have, and say, come in. We're going to fill the gap. And where your kids need internet access, hey, we're going to make sure that we got a building over here, a cafe over here, whatever you want to call it, to make sure your students can have access to what they need. That's what I'm talking about, sustainability. That sustainability must be envisioned in a way where we see ourselves, keeping ourselves going, whether somebody gives us a nickel, a dime, a quarter, or nothing.
Thank you. I think that is a very important reminder. Like, sustainability has to be considered always. And there are strategies and lessons and wisdom that can be drawn from the past of the field on how to do that. And I think that that's something that has been, for me personally, that's something that has been really front of mind lately. Like, thinking about what are the lessons that can be integrated today from the work that has been done before, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel? What does it
Mhm.
look like to take these strategies in 2025, um, to ensure that we do have what we need for our communities?
Mhm.
So that kind of addressed the final question I was going to ask you, but I do want to just pose it anyway. So what interests or excites you most about the future of the field and where it can or is going?
Well, when I'm at NCBS annual conference, there's a generation of up and coming students on fire. They want to not only do the research, they want to know the social science part of it, they want to know the ethics part of it, and they want to be both inside a classroom and outside in the community. And there are people who may not want to be in a classroom, but they want to understand how to use the space where they are to help us continue the conversation about not only where we've come from, but how understanding where we have come from is also a form of it's a form of compensating ourselves. You're rewarding yourself with knowledge as opposed to money. Although we do know money is important in this world, and so I think that what makes me hopeful is that there are generations that are coming up that are unapologetic about Black studies. And what I mean about that, they don't want to spend the time trying to convince folks, oh, this is a good thing. As long as they seem to understand that this is a good and important thing, they willing to take whatever means necessary intellectually, socially, as well as culturally to make sure that knowledge is sustained and paid forward. And that's what excites me. I see at our annual meetings um, the future, but I also see in our PhD program at Indiana University in African Diaspora Studies the future. And we have an intersection of students doing dissertation based in creativity, other doing traditional kind of dissertation, but they are taking on subject matters I think that are important for the world to understand about Africans in the life throughout the world, on and off the continent. And that's what excites me.
Thank you so much for your time and your insights. Is there anything you would like to add?
Well, I would just like to encourage people to become involved with the National Council for Black Studies. There's room for everybody, but there's especially room for future generation who want to come hear these conversations. We had a fantastic conference in Cincinnati, co-sponsored by the University of Cincinnati. And that was a really, really live conference. I mean, we had people there who were just really interested in this moment. And I think the moment now is not just to worry about what's happening in Washington as much as it is to say to ourselves, we have what we need. Let's get going. Let's keep going, and let's get the next generation ready to continue the dialogue and to continue the struggle. And so if people are interested in understanding how, in a very sort of close-knit kind of way, how some people in the country are planning to continue the struggle, both in the academy and working with people in the community and training students, we invite you to come to the National Council of Black Studies meetings and to become involved.
Thank you. That is also a very important reminder. It was very fun and interesting in Cincinnati this year. I really enjoyed myself. So,
Oh, you were in Cincinnati? I didn't bump into you. Wow. That's great, Ashley. Yes.
yeah, it was. We weren't able to stay long because my daughter wasn't on spring break. So
Okay.
we came in for the weekend, but I had a lot of fun while we were there.
Wow, this was a year where I observed a lot of people bringing their teenage kids, bringing their children. just to meet certain people and just to kind of soak it in. And we were happy to have them. I like, hey, future PhD, and and just trying to encourage them to believe they can get there.
Mm-hmm. I think that's so important. And I mean, my daughter has to go everywhere with me, but uh, it is something I think that, as you said, like representation is important, and having that representation young is important. For my daughter to see so many Black PhDs throughout her life is really important to me. And understanding that, like, nah, Black people have PhDs and they do this work and it's fun and interesting. I'm really glad that there are spaces that she gets to witness that.
How old is your daughter?
She's 12.
Oh yeah, that's a good age. Yes, in terms of exposing. I know it can be a struggle those pre-teenage years, but at least it's a good age for just exposing her to all kinds of new things. Can I ask one last question before we go?
Absolutely.
When does your podcast air?
So it really depends on the schedule. So right now we're scheduled out through, I think, mid to late May. So this will probably come out in either very late May or early June. But I will let you know.
Okay, that would be great.
That come out. I will send you the email with the link and all of that.
That would be great. Yeah. Well, you're doing good work. And thank you for taking the time to start this podcast, but also to create a space where conversations can be had. And I just think that this kind of podcast is going to be very, very important in the months and years to come, because I think it is a place where we have to remind ourselves to get up, get going, and to remember we are our own cavalry. And that's what I'm trying to tell people. No soldiers are coming to save you. We got to save ourselves and see that we are our cavalry.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate that. And I appreciate the time and insight from you and other scholars and activists and artists who it's been a very helpful reminder. I do think that in this moment, being able to be engaged in these conversations has been really affirming and sustaining for me personally, in the work that I do, but just also in having hope, right? And not having despair and depression about everything that's happening every single day. It's like now we have a history of this, and people know that history and are doing the work, and it's going to continue regardless. And it's been really, really helpful for that.
Yes, I agree.
Well, thank you so much again.
Thank you, Ashley. It's really good to see you and to know and see the work that you're doing. And I appreciate you so much for this work. And if I can help you in any way, you know how to reach me.
Yes. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Be well now.
You too.
Bye. Bye.